$70 billion, that is how much military spending just walked away from American defense contractors. Not over years, not gradually. Overnight. Mark Carney stood in Brussels declaring that Canada would redirect the majority of its military budget away from the United States and straight into European hands. The most devastating military divorce in North American history was official. Trump's insults had finally cost America something irreplaceable. This isn't just about money. This is about the collapse of a 70-year military partnership that kept North America secure. About how one man's need to mock allies destroyed relationships that generations of leaders built. About how Europe just pulled off the greatest diplomatic coup of the decade by offering Canada something America couldn't respect. But before we dive into this incredible story, if you appreciate in-depth analysis like this, hit that like button and subscribe to stay informed on the stories that truly matter. Tonight, we're showing you how Mark Carney engineered the most brilliant strategic pivot in Canadian history, how Europe weaponized American arrogance against itself, and why American defense contractors are about to experience their worst nightmare: the end of guaranteed Canadian contracts. Let's start with the moment that changed everything. Brussels, early December 2025. According to leaked diplomatic sources, Mark Carney wasn't supposed to be there. Canadian prime ministers don't typically attend European Union defense meetings, but there he was, flanked by European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, signing documents that would reshape Western military alliances forever. The Security Action for Europe Initiative, SAFE. A €150 billion defense fund designed to build European military independence. And for the first time in its history, SAFE was admitting a non-European partner, Canada. The country that spent 70% of its military budget on American weapons was about to change sides. Von der Leyen couldn't hide her excitement. "Welcome to SAFE, Canada," she posted on social media, but the real celebration was happening behind closed doors. European defense officials had spent years trying to break American dominance in military technology. They'd failed repeatedly because American systems were simply too advanced, too integrated, too essential. Then Trump handed them the perfect partner, a country with advanced manufacturing, significant defense needs, and thanks to his constant insults, a burning desire to escape American control. The details of Carney's European deal are staggering. Canadian defense companies now have access to low-interest EU-backed loans that American competitors can't match. They can bid on contracts across 27 European nations. They can participate in joint weapons development programs, all while operating under a crucial restriction: non-signatory nations, meaning the United States, are limited to 35% participation in any single project. Translation: for the first time since World War II, Canada is building a military specifically designed to not need American weapons. But how did we get here? How did America's closest ally, its most reliable partner, decide that Europe was a better option than the United States? The breaking point came when Trump called Canada the 51st state. Not once, not as a joke, repeatedly, publicly, while suggesting Mark Carney could govern this new American territory for Canadians. That wasn't political theater. That was an existential threat. When your neighbor starts talking about annexation, you don't laugh. You start planning alternatives. Carney built his entire prime ministerial campaign around one promise: end Canada's dangerous dependence on American unpredictability. He won in a landslide because Canadians were terrified of becoming America's subordinate territory instead of a sovereign ally. The moment Carney took power, he activated relationships European leaders had been building quietly for years. They'd been waiting for exactly this opportunity. An advanced Western democracy ready to break away from American military dominance. Canada was perfect. Here is what American defense contractors are losing. The F-35 fighter jet program alone was worth $50 billion to American companies. Canada had committed to purchasing dozens of these advanced aircraft. That deal is now under review, with European alternatives suddenly viable. Swedish Gripen jets, French Rafales, Eurofighter Typhoons, all now competing for contracts that were once guaranteed American victories. But fighters are just the beginning. Canadian procurement of submarines, artillery systems, missile defense, satellite communications, all of it traditionally flowed to American companies. Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman. These corporations have entire divisions dedicated to serving Canadian clients. Those divisions are about to become irrelevant. A defense industry analyst in Washington described the situation brutally. We're not just losing current contracts, we're losing access to a market we considered birthright. The Canadians aren't just buying European, they're building European, creating supply chains that deliberately bypass American involvement. The military implications are even more serious than the economic ones. NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, has protected the continent since 1958. It is built on absolute integration between Canadian and American forces. Compatible equipment, shared communications, unified command structure. What happens when Canadian fighter jets are Swedish? Their missile systems are French, their communications are German. The interoperability that has been taken for granted for 70 years suddenly becomes impossible. And here is the terrifying question. If Canada is deliberately building military capabilities to reduce dependence on America, are Canadian and American defense interests still automatically aligned? European leaders understood this leverage perfectly. They didn't just offer Canada weapons contracts, they offered partnership based on equality rather than dominance. French President Emmanuel Macron's message to Carney was simple: join us as an equal partner, not as a junior ally expected to follow orders. The contrast with Trump's approach couldn't be sharper. While Trump demanded Canada pay more for American protection and called them freeloaders, Europe offered them leadership roles in joint programs. While Trump threatened tariffs on Canadian products, Europe offered low-interest loans for Canadian companies. While Trump mocked Canadian sovereignty, Europe celebrated it. The timing was perfect for Europe. The Ukraine war had exposed how dangerously dependent European nations had become on American weapons. When the conflict started, European stockpiles were depleted, production capacity was insufficient, and their entire defense strategy relied on American willingness to supply them. Building European military independence wasn't just strategic preference anymore, it was survival necessity. Canada solved multiple problems simultaneously: advanced manufacturing capabilities, technical expertise, and crucially, political motivation to break from American dominance. The partnership gives Europe a sophisticated production base outside American control, while giving Canada access to markets and technology that reduce their dependence on American suppliers. Arctic security represents the most dangerous aspect of this realignment. Climate change is opening Arctic shipping routes and exposing new vulnerabilities. For decades, Arctic defense has been assumed to be joint US-Canadian responsibility. What if Canada decides they trust Nordic European partners more than American ones? Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark. These countries have serious Arctic capabilities and no interest in treating Canada as a subordinate. If Canada starts coordinating Arctic defense with European allies instead of American ones, the entire strategic map of North America changes. The economic multiplier effects are already spreading. When Canada buys American weapons systems, American companies don't just sell hardware. They provide decades of maintenance contracts, training programs, software updates, parts, and supplies. Revenue streams that continue for 30 years after the initial purchase. All of that is now at risk. Defense contractors are starting layoffs. Engineering programs are being canceled. Research funding is disappearing. Communities built around defense manufacturing are watching their economic foundations erode. And it is all preventable. All Trump had to do was treat Canada with basic diplomatic respect. Border state governors are quietly panicking. Montana, North Dakota, Minnesota, Michigan, New York, Vermont. These states built their economies on the assumption of seamless Canadian integration. Defense contractors in these states depend on Canadian business. Regional economic development was planned around continuing military cooperation. A mayor in upstate New York told local media the consumer boycott was emotional. People get angry. They cool off eventually. This is different. These are institutional relationships, supply chains, being rebuilt from scratch. This doesn't reverse when political winds change. Meanwhile, leaders in Moscow and Beijing are watching very carefully. Russia spent decades trying to drive wedges between NATO allies through cyber operations, disinformation, political interference. they failed repeatedly because Western unity was based on shared interests and American leadership. Trump just accomplished what Putin couldn't for free. At a rally, by getting applause for mocking America's closest ally, China's Belt and Road Initiative was designed to create alternatives to American-led economic integration. The Canada-EU defense deal proves their strategy works. It demonstrates that even America's most loyal allies will build alternatives when treated with contempt. The supreme irony is staggering. Trump promised to make America great again by being tough with allies. Instead, he is presiding over the most significant erosion of American military influence since the end of the Cold War. Every insult, every threat, every moment of treating allies as subordinates instead of partners has cumulative effects that compound into strategic disasters. Mark Carney's message to Europe was clear: Canada is ready to be a partner, not a satellite. European leaders responded by offering exactly what America couldn't respect: equality and genuine partnership based on mutual interest rather than assumed dominance. The Western alliance system that projected American power across the globe for 70 years is fracturing, not because of external threats, not because rivals got stronger, but because an American president decided that insulting allies was good politics. That empty chair at defense procurement meetings used to be reserved for American contractors. Now it is occupied by European and Canadian companies building weapons systems specifically designed to not need American cooperation. And every day that chair stays occupied by America's former partners, the harder it becomes for the United States to reclaim its position as the essential ally that everyone needs but no one can replace. The human cost is already visible. Lockheed Martin announced layoffs at their Canadian operations facility. Boeing cancelled expansion plans for their Montreal service center. Raytheon quietly shelved joint research programs worth hundreds of millions. These aren't just corporate reshuffles. These are American jobs disappearing because their president couldn't stop insulting allies. What makes this particularly devastating is the timing. Other allies are watching Canada's successful pivot very carefully. Australia has been quietly exploring European defense partnerships. Japan is reconsidering its F-35 orders. South Korea is asking whether American reliability justifies continued dependence. Canada just proved that alternatives exist. That American military dominance isn't inevitable, that even the closest allies can walk away when treated with contempt. The cascade effect is only beginning. If Canada can successfully build a military independent of American systems, every other ally will start asking why they can't do the same. Every arms deal becomes a question of whether America deserves continued trust. Every insult from Washington gets measured against the cost of finding alternatives. And here is what should terrify American strategic planners most. This isn't reversible with a simple policy change or diplomatic apology. The infrastructure being built, the relationships being formed, the supply chains being established. They're designed for permanence. European defense ministers aren't planning temporary partnerships with Canada. They're building a military-industrial complex that deliberately excludes American participation. The missile defense radar system Canada was supposed to build with American contractors. Now it is a joint Canadian-Swedish project. The submarine fleet Canada was considering purchasing from American shipyards. French companies are submitting competitive bids with EU financing that makes American offers irrelevant. The satellite communication network that was going to link Canadian and American forces. Germany is offering technology that works exclusively with European systems. Every month that passes, every new contract signed, every joint program launched makes Canada more integrated with European defense systems and less compatible with American ones. The window for reversing this strategic disaster is closing rapidly, and Trump doesn't even seem to realize what he has lost. Meanwhile, Mark Carney is planning his next move. Intelligence sources suggest Canada is considering joining European space defense initiatives, potentially ending decades of cooperation with America's Space Force, the Arctic patrol vessels Canada needs for sovereignty enforcement. European shipyards are already submitting proposals that promise technology transfer and job creation in Canada rather than just equipment sales. Trump got applause at his rallies for calling Canada the 51st state. Mark Carney got $70 billion in military contracts and a partnership with Europe that makes American approval optional. The cost-benefit analysis couldn't be clearer. America traded irreplaceable strategic relationships for temporary political points, and the world is moving on without them.